That's right. Once again, today's session will take approximately 19 minutes, so about 1.5 hours or so. We are aiming to finish by 10 p.m., but we're starting a little bit late, so do bear with us if we exceed. I think all of us will be interested to learn as much as we can tonight. I also want to remind people that tonight we're going to be covering, a fairly sensitive topic in Malaysia. It's always nice when we talk about religion. But let's approach tonight with a very open mind. I love this quote by Aristotle. Let me just find the quote and sound very atas. It is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. So tonight I want you guys to challenge yourselves, entertain some thoughts that you may not have otherwise considered, and don't create what is called an echo chamber. A lot of people go for these religious and atheist debates and they come back with an echo chamber, which means they only look for points which validate their own points. Try not to do that. Try to look for points or opinions that challenge your own so that you can perhaps learn something from tonight. Everybody okay with that? Amen. Well... I'm a comedian, I have to build tension and break it. That's normal. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, alright, let me just quickly explain a little bit about Explain Apologetics, who's the organizer for this evening. I think we have some slides on the screen. Just quickly run through. You have some slides? I don't know, if it comes on, it comes on. If it doesn't, I'll just explain a little bit. So Explain Apologetics is the organizing party for tonight's debate. The desire for the Explain Apologetics group is to make clear the gospel of Jesus Christ as revealed in the Holy Scripture with relevant facts and details in order that the unbeliever may place their faith in Jesus Christ. Their goal is to equip the local church with explainables, i.e. people who are able to explain their faith when questioned. And so they've got a lot of this training and seminars that they're going to be rolling out. They're a fairly new ministry and they're going to be rolling out all of this in time to come. So if you're interested with apologetics, please do contact the speakers after that. Next, we've got the Explainable project to equip the local churches to be able to answer questions when questioned about the faith. Alright, just a quick overview of that. And I think without further ado, we are ready to begin. Are you ready, ladies and gentlemen? Are you excited? And put your hands together and welcome both our teams of speakers for this evening. Now, no debate is complete without a good moderator. Can you also put your hands together for Dr. Phillips Koh, our moderator for this evening? Thank you, Dr. Phillips. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, sit back, relax, and open your mind. Thank you.
Pastor Sam just recruited me, so I'm brand new as well. The format will be as follows. First of all, there will be opening speech, where each side will be given 15 minutes each. That means at least 7.5 minutes for each speaker. And then it will be followed by the first rebuttal, 10 minutes for each side, but no new arguments are to be presented. Thirdly, there will be the first cross-examination, 6 minutes for each side, questions only, no new arguments or assertions, and they have to answer without dodging the question. The fourth part is the second rebuttal, 6 minutes each side. They have to respond to the previous rebuttal or cross-examination. Then the fifth one is the second cross-examination, 6 minutes, questions, primarily related to the second rebuttal. Then it will be followed by closing speech. Now the format is the atheist side will start first, but when it comes to the closing speech, Pastor Sam and Mark Tan will begin first. Then that will be followed by a question and answer session. So this is how the format goes. So without further ado, I will now call upon the atheist side to begin the opening speech.
Testing. Greetings from the dark side. Before I start, I'd like to thank Samuel, Mark, and Explain Apologetics for inviting us to this debate. This is the third such event we're having, and we're glad we're having an open dialogue like this, where we can understand different points of view. Today, Willie and I are representing MASH, the Malaysian Atheists and Secular Humanists. We're a group of atheists whose purpose is very relevant to today's debate. We believe in improving humanity in a secular way, which Willie will talk about later. Now, obviously, we don't only want to prove that it's possible for one man to be good without God. Everyone probably agrees that Bill Gates is a pretty good person, especially after leaving Microsoft. He donates a lot of money to the world, does a lot of charitable causes, gives to the world. Now, even though being an atheist. Now, this debate centers around the word good, and Oxford gives us two definitions for it. That which is morally right and benefit or advantage to someone or something. Conveniently, we believe as secular humanists is essentially that whatever benefits the most people is what is morally right. We believe that it should be possible for mankind to achieve a consensus on what benefits the most people without resorting to religious commandments. Now, morality as a concept is something that only exists when two or more people are involved. A hermit who's never seen another human being or interacted with anyone would not even come up with concepts such as don't kill or don't steal, because they do not have to even answer those kinds of simple moral questions. Morality only comes to be when people start to come together as societies, and we're going to be looking into that starting from the most basic units, the family. Now, the love of a parent to a child, I'm supposed to switch slides now. Oh, sorry, I missed that signposting. The love of a parent to a child is called the strongest bond of unconditional love that is. Even God is always characterized as a loving father and who loves his children, to give people an idea of the kind of love that a parent or God has for his children. And we all agree it is right and good for you to love your child and to protect them. But where does this love come from? Now, parents, when you get your newborn baby, you don't look at the baby and make a conscious, reasoned decision that I'm going to love this baby for the rest of my life. It's something natural that comes unbidden. You know, it just happens. Now, why does this happen? No, to figure that out, we can also look at another class of individuals we often ignore: animals. Animals don't explicitly reason right and wrong, but they also display tendencies that we associate with goodness. They also love their offspring. They help one another in their groups. They share resources. So from what we can see here is that the basic building blocks of morality started with our basic biology. Now, it's so much known to us, we have many ideas on what gives us a biological imperative to be moral. We are more altruistic, which means being concerned for the well-being of others, especially to our own relatives compared to other people. We tend to favor our family opposed to strangers because they share our genes. They are our flesh and blood. And this also tends to lead towards our own natural nepotistic tendencies, which I'll get into later. And we also have reciprocal altruism. Now, reciprocal is when you return good for good and bad for bad, when you basically scratch each other's back. Now, that explains how helping others in return will also help you, because when you're in a basic community, when you help your brother will return the favor sometime later, usually, if he's a good brother. And altruism can also be seen as a form of abundance. Now, because I have so much to offer, I can help other people without disadvantaging myself. Now, this is a good trait to exhibit in nature, because it shows that you can care for more people, you can provide more, and it's what people look for even now when you look for a desirable mate. You look for someone who's kind, who's helpful, who can help out. Now, as noted earlier, as human beings evolve, it became clear that ethical systems of the world tend to reflect this aspect of human nature. The Old Testament, for example, admonishes us to honor our father and mother, and Confucius asks us to value filial piety, which is love and respect for one's parents and ancestors. Likewise, humans also evolved this trait to reciprocate reciprocate, and the principles embodied in many of our ethical teachings and spiritual belief. We like to believe that justice will be balanced, that the scales of justice will be balanced, and this is This is shown by having the belief that God rewards and punishes behavior, and also either through a non-God-like karma, for example, that will just come back and hit you in the head someday. Now, our natural impulse alone doesn't paint a full picture of morality, as it doesn't answer why we wrangle over what is right and wrong. So sometimes we have a hard time following what we deem is right, hard time making the right decision, because some moral standards go against our natural inclinations. And to explain this, we must go beyond biology and look at how culture has shaped moral norms. Although we have some degree of universal compassion, we also routinely tend to favor ourselves, family members, and members of the group we belong to. This is why I mentioned nepotism earlier. This has a clear evolutionary origin. But most ethical systems frown on this kind of favoritism. They establish pejorative labels to these kind of things as selfishness, nepotism, racism, and all these kind of labels. We do not think that this is a good thing. Similarly, although many moral precepts reflect the reciprocity principle, that is not always the case. For example, even from the Bible, it says, turn the other cheek. This is not something that is natural to people. It's something that's against our untrained inclinations. This demonstrates that our naturalistic inclinations must be distinguished from our formalized morality, and that moral norms can and do stray away from human nature. So why does this happen? Why do sometimes some things are natural and some moral norms are not natural?
The speaker, you have 1 more minute left.
Okay. This includes, so for example, this is what happens. The desire to care for one's children and to form monogamous pairs through marriage, for example, is not considered immoral, while aggression, xenophobia, and our proneness to be unfaithful sexually is considered immoral in society. Now, why is this so? Familial love and monogamy does not affect the harmony of the community, whereas aggression and infidelity often do. This brings us back to what morality actually is. It's a human-made system of favoring those tendencies that facilitate group cohesion, while disfavoring those that are socially divisive. Morality is a way of controlling our natures rather than a mere reflection of those natures. Now, yeah, I'm going to pass this on to Willie because I'm running out of time. So I'm going to hold this mic for you. How are you going to put it down? Put it first.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, so I'm taking over from Navin. So you've heard from Navin how morality had a beginning in our natures and how by applying reason we can develop morals to transcend those natures. I, on the other hand, want to talk to you now about 2 things, how this looks like through humanity's history and the changing landscape of morality, and I'll end with a little bit about secular humanism. So firstly, how did living conditions change through history until hundreds of us here today can gather in a room and talk about philosophical things like good or whether God is necessary for it? Jared Diamond, a cultural anthropologist who studied how human society changes over the years, divide the way which we organize ourselves into 4 approximate categories, as you can see on the slides. We have bands, tribes, chiefdoms, and states. So we started off with nomadic bands, which was the most common way humans lived very, very long ago. Consisting of only dozens of people, these are basically extended families. And within the last 10 or 20,000 years, with the advent of agriculture, we developed into tribes, where hundreds of people live together as a societal unit made up of multiple extended families with fixed settlements. So this is what anthropologists find when they study the way in which humans lived long time in the past. Now, bands and tribes did not have formal institutions or laws. When it comes to resolution of conflict, they relied on family connections. It's easier to kill a stranger than it is to kill your brother's wife's brother. Right? So tribes also sometimes had a trusted big man who was not a king, but he helped negotiate conflict, trade, and so on. And this eventually evolved to chiefdoms, where we started centralizing authority and the right to use force in one person, hereditary chief or king. Tributes are paid, and non-reciprocal wealth redistribution began. I'm guessing the king redistributed a lot of wealth to himself. And with conflict resolution also centralized, humans began to live together in the thousands. So this is all about numbers, right? How can more and more people live together without killing one another? And this obviously introduced the problem of how chiefs justify their power. Some do this by keeping people happy through food, security, some by disarming the general population, and more relevant to us, some invented or adopted religions. chiefs claim to be gods, descendant of gods, or at the minimum to have a hotline to the gods. Luckily, Samuel or Mark here don't have designs for power despite their hotline. Otherwise, we'll see gold chains, bling, private jets, and so on. So divine right of rulership is actually a great tool to keep a chief in power. What we're most familiar today are, of course, states, which evolve slowly out of chiefdoms. Our own country is a collection of chiefdoms with a chief of chiefs whose power has been transferred to the state and its laws. Today, we refer to the laws to resolve conflicts between us, and the rule of law, which our new old Prime Minister luckily seems to love, protects all of us. Navin actually suggested that we play a drinking game with Mahathir's press conferences. Every time he says rule of law, we take a shot. But unfortunately, I don't drink. Not because I'm good, but because my genes are not so good. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that leads us to my second point. From the way human society developed through the past, we can see that there's a shifting moral standard. Back then, the most important good is your own survival and perhaps that of your family, right? But when two strangers ran into each other, there was constant fear of conflict and death. So why would humans group up into larger and larger numbers? The answer is fairly obvious. When conflicts happen, the larger group of people working together would typically win. As such, humanity naturally recognized the advantage of forming tribes, and what is good for you as an individual needs to expand to include what is good for the tribe as a whole. So large groups of humans living together allowed things like worker specialization, giving us food surplus, the ability to support artists, scientists, people who are free from manual labor and had the time to wonder why the sky is blue. And from there, you have electricity, cars, the internet. Right? It's a little bit of a stretch, a little bit of a leap, but you get my point. There are many, many good reasons why we should live together and not kill one another, and you do not need a higher power independent of space and time to tell you that. As society gets more complex, with people from different backgrounds interacting, more conflict obviously arises. The resolution of these conflicts will rely on our ability to understand each other's point of view, and from there we establish a baseline, right? Things like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So morality is subjective, but when it accounts for all of our well-being, that is a good thing. Ladies and gentlemen, to introduce some specific examples, I'm about to say homosexuality out loud in church. I forgot to ask Mark if this is the kind of church that is cool with gays. Tell me later, yeah? So, homosexuality was accepted by significantly less of society in the past. Yet today, those who still do not accept it talk about loving the person and not the sin. Right? The average person's perspective have shifted a long way from misconceptions like that it was a choice, some kind of mental illness, or that it could spread. Science has given us a better understanding about a great many things, and homosexuality is no exception. We have every indication that sexual orientation is not a choice but a mixture of genetic, hormonal, and environmental influences. We are pretty certain that conversion therapies or surgeries do not work. We are also pretty certain that it is not a mental illness causing the person no harm in and of itself. As this knowledge becomes more widespread and commonly accepted, society's attitude towards homosexuality has changed, as it should. Let's look at a different, less controversial example, vegetarianism. So difficult to pronounce. I am not a vegetarian. I love my meat. However, I tell people that the question of going vegetarian may one day turn me from a liberal to a conservative. No one is taking my meat away. Yet, I recognize that there are many points about going vegetarian which I cannot refute. The issue of animal suffering is one which I may be able to grapple with a little bit as long as livestock are treated humanely. However, the fact that plants are likely more sustainable than meat as a food source is one that I cannot dismiss easily, considering that I think of myself as an environmentalist. So if going vegetarian is proven as the right thing to do for the sustainability of humanity, then I should definitely adjust my moral compass to recognize it as something to embrace. And of course, today I call myself a humanist, advancing the goals of improving the well-being of mankind. But if aliens were to pay us a visit tomorrow, and they turn out to be pretty nice people, I currently cannot find any reason not to expand my humanism to all-sentient beingism. So I hope we have shown you how godless heathens like ourselves establish an understanding of good. However, there's one last thing that we'd like to point out. It's better to do some things our way. Take Malaysia, for example. We're a nation of many races, traditions, and religions. What is mandated in each of these belief systems may not be in another. I'm sure none of us wants to be subjected to a law based on another person's religions, dogmas, or beliefs.
You've got one more minute.
That may be contrary to our own. So what is the common ground on which we can decide what is good or bad? In such a society, shouldn't the way we determine society's laws and norms be based on applying reason and conversation like this to figure out what is good for all of us in the here and now, religious or irreligious, Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu? And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what secular humanism is all about. We honestly don't care if you're an atheist or not. If you believe in the cause of improving human life in a secular, rational way, we would love it if you would join us. Talk to Navin, who's our president. Thank you.
Now I call upon this side to give the opening speech.
Good evening. Well, it gives me pleasure to welcome both the godly and the godless to this wonderful church of all places. I'm glad to say I managed to bring you both to church, so I'm hoping that you stay here much longer, the both of you. And that is the purpose of Explain Apologetics, bringing every non-believer to church. All right, here we go. Well, the title for today's discussion is, Can Humanity Be Good Without God? Before I begin, I think it's quite essential that we define certain terms, lest we get caught up in arguing past each other. The central thrust of tonight's discussion is whether do we need a higher power to be good, or can we basically be good on our own? And we've seen a case presented from the atheistic side or the MASH side, which we will be happy to rebut, but this is not a rebuttal, and I will be taking all 15 minutes just to deal with this. Mark will only get involved later. Thanks, Mark, for allowing me to do that. Now, what I'm going to do here is, first of all, present a bit of a disclaimer. What this discussion is today, it is a discussion on whether we can be good without God. It is not whether we can do good without God. I hope you paid careful attention to the opening speech, because, and I'll address this further later, the discussion today is going to be whether we can be good without God and not doing good. And also, I'm glad to say that it's not about whether we can be good without religion. Religion is not the focus of tonight's discussion. It's on whether we can be good without a higher supreme being, as Willie, to quote what Willie said. Because if you look at it, I totally agree with what Willie and basically Navin said, that there have been many people who, without belief in God, have done a lot of good things. Notably, Andrew Carnegie, the industrialist, who said in his own words that he got rid of theology and the supernatural, and in return basically contributed his wealth towards, from the rail to universities, schools, and so forth, gives us an example of how people who don't believe in God can actually do good things. So that's really not the discussion tonight. But before we begin, it's also essential, before I start, to define what I mean by good, and also to define exactly where the differences lie between my presentation and theirs. I'm going to argue tonight that in order for something to be good, we need to argue from a position of objective morality. Meaning, it would be arguing past each other tonight if we were going to come and say, I have an idea of what is good and you have an idea of good, but based on my understanding of good, it seems that we can be good without God, but based on your understanding of good, we can't be good without God. I want to submit to you before we start that there ought to be an objective standard by which we appeal to in discussing this. So what do I mean by an objective standard? The Oxford Dictionary helps us out here simply by saying an objective standard means that it is not dependent on the mind for existence, meaning it would be true, mind independent. Secondly, the Oxford Dictionary also says it is not influenced by personal feelings or opinions. So not mind independent. It's mind independent and not influenced by personal feelings. So with this in mind, let me present to you three arguments. Two of them are going to be philosophical in nature. One of them will be theological, because I think it kind of touches a theological nerve. To my first argument, can I have it on the slides? Well, it's the argument from purpose. I believe that premise one, nothing or no one can be objectively good without an objective purpose. I've already defined what I mean by objective, so I don't have to get again and define it. Nothing or no one can be objectively good without an objective purpose. Now, I realized not too far away from here, behind USJ Summit, let me give you the location, that there is actually a 2 ringgit shop, which a lot of people basically swarm into. I can see some of you already taking down notes. This is You certainly know what's good for you. But the point here is that when you go to the 2 ringgit shop, what I realize is it's astounding is that they even sell knives for 2 ringgit. Believe it or not. 2 ringgit for knives. In spite of its cheap price, I wonder if any of you would purchase a knife that is blunt. Would any of us purchase a blunt knife? You wouldn't. In fact, you would categorize a blunt knife as being not good, bad. But the question is why? What if someone were to argue on behalf of the knife and say, hey, wait a minute, the knife has not hurt anyone. How can you say it's bad? Maybe this is the only knife in the world, therefore it has to be good. But you see, the essential thing that incriminates the knife, whether it is good or bad, is essentially its purpose. The knife's ability to achieve its purpose makes it good. The knife's disability to achieve the purpose or to fail its purpose is basically what makes it bad. So I submit to you that we cannot objectively be good without an objective purpose, and that leads me to premise 2. The objective purpose can only be derived from a creator. Without a creator, no objective purpose exists, but subjective purpose. For example, just imagine this knife is a real person. I know it is not, it's just an object. But let's just imagine, can the knife define for itself what its purpose is? Well, that it can, but it wouldn't be objective. You see, for it to be objective, its maker would have to have an intended purpose behind creating that knife. If the knife is able to cut, it's good. If it fails that, it's bad. So, premise 1, nothing can be objectively good without an objective purpose. Number 2, an objective purpose can only be derived from a creator, and it leads me to my conclusion in this first argument that humanity, as in the knife analogy, cannot objectively be good without a creator, i.e. God. So at this point, basically what I'm essentially trying to say is, if there is a God and God created man, he creates man with a particular purpose in mind. If man achieves that purpose, he's good. If man doesn't achieve that purpose, he just hides himself as a hermit, doesn't do anything. In my opinion, he's not good because he's failed the purpose that the Creator has built for him. So purpose can only be derived from a Creator, and without that Creator, all that is left is subjective reasoning. Your reason for existence is within yourself, and so is mine. We cannot arrive at an objective standard. Second argument is the argument from authority. In the argument from authority, what I realized is that I believe it was Martin Luther King Jr., who was the activist from Birmingham prison, who wrote on civil disobedience and said that there are 2 kinds of laws, the just laws and the unjust laws, but he says that both these laws are subject to what he calls natural law. So he's saying that there are laws in the country, there's laws in the land, but these laws are subject to a higher law, a transcendent law, if you like, and this law he calls natural law. So basically what I want to argue here is that while every person is basically able to have laws, I mean, if you have a family, you would have laws within your family. What if your laws were unjust? There would be a higher law that you were to appeal to. For example, if a father has a house in which he says it's okay to hurt and abuse his children and his wife, that would be a law that applies to the house. But wait a minute, that wouldn't really be good because there is a higher law, namely the law of the land. And if the law of the land is evil, there ought to be a higher law, is what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is arguing. And I think he has a point here. So this leads me to my first point, that moral obligations or duties require an authoritative moral lawgiver. Why does it merit that? Because without this, moral laws are no longer obligatory. They are basically suggestions. They're basically proposals. It would be better if you do this. It would be better if you did that. There is no element of binding or obligatory sense, in an obligatory sense, if there is no authoritative moral lawgiver. And also, I think that one of the things you'd have to pay attention to tonight as we discuss is that there's going to be a difference between the is and the ought. There is a sense of morality and altruism on our part. I don't deny that. There is. but that is and is. I want to suggest that it is going to be a huge jump if we are going to go from what is to what ought to be done. Just because we have, for example, an altruism that gives us empathy to one another doesn't give us the jump to say, therefore, that one ought to do that. So unless, of course, you have an authoritative moral lawgiver. So what I believe is that governments basically don't invent laws. They discover these laws that already exist and basically affirm them. And as the American Constitution says, we hold these things to be self-evident, that all men are to be created equal, treated equal, and so forth. My second point is that God is the only authoritative moral lawgiver. Now, by that statement, I do not mean that God is the only authority and that basically the governments are no longer the authority. What I mean by only here is that God is the highest form of authority by which one should appeal to. Imagine living in a country where, for example, a kleptocracy, we might be familiar with that, where basically the government is corrupt. Who is going to hold the government accountable? What if they reply, well, that is the law of the land, like it or not, this is it. But you see, even if that is true, what would incriminate them is a higher law. And again, this is what Martin Luther King Jr. is appealing to. There is a higher law, and on the basis of that higher law, we can incriminate someone. In Nazi Germany, the soldiers, the SS soldiers that were in charge of the Holocaust, they were put on trial and basically were condemned to death, many of them. But they could easily argue back, we were just following the law of our land. But notice, what was done is that they said, well, you were following the laws of your land, but there was a higher law which you ought to have followed, a law that transcended the law of your own land. So I submit to you that, as I said, moral obligation and duties require an authoritative moral lawgiver. God is the only authoritative moral lawgiver. Someone could very easily pop up and say, hey, I didn't sign that social contract. What makes it binding on me? And only God, who creates all mankind, can basically hold everyone accountable in this sense. And therefore, I reach my conclusion: humanity cannot be morally good without God. If God doesn't exist, we are like people floating in space, telling one another, you are upside down. But hey, you don't have a ground on which to say that. At best, what you can do is say 90% of the people are tilted at this particular angle. Therefore, if you don't accommodate to this particular angle, you're wrong, you're upside down. But yet the 99% really have no ground to make that statement other than the majority rules argument. My final argument is going to be a theological one. And this is going to be a religious argument, I submit, and I'll be happy to defend this all evening if needs be. I'm going to argue from a theological point something that is unique to Christianity, and I want to argue that every person is capable of moral choices. Premise one, humanity is morally depraved. Humanity is morally depraved. How many of us here have told a lie before? Can I see your hands, please? Those hands that didn't go up, they actually should be up as well. What does that all make us? Liars. I'm speaking in front of liars, being a liar myself, because I too am as guilty as you are. How many of us have taken something that doesn't belong to you before? Can I see those hands? Well, that tells you something, isn't it? That we are in the midst of lying thieves. If that one, I could go down that list if we had enough time to go, just to show us how good we are. But the fact of the matter is we are all morally depraved. We need help. As C.S. Lewis says, that what we need is no longer a moral teacher. We all know what those moral laws are. What we need is a savior. Which leads me to point two: only God can save humanity. We know the good. We know what we ought to do, and I think my opponents acknowledge that as well. But we fail to do it sometimes. But the other alternative really is to compare, what we call the sin of comparison. Wait, I'm good because I'm better than the 99% of people.
You got 1 more minute.
Sure. I'm good because I'm comparing myself to the 99 people. But you see, when you compare yourself to other people, you will always find someone who is worse off than we are. We cannot find someone. We will not compare ourselves to someone who is better. So, premise one, humanity is morally depraved, Premise 2, only God can save humanity, and for me, provide forgiveness for our mistakes and to give us a new nature to change us from within. Therefore, humanity cannot be good without God. And in my final seconds, let me say this. There's been only one human being that has been good. His name is Jesus Christ. And I appeal for all of you who haven't put your faith in him, perhaps it will be a wise thing to consider that. Thank you.
Now I invite the other side to give their first rebuttal. 10 minutes. Willie, are you going to take the full 10 minutes or are you going to split? You're taking the full 10 minutes.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, now that I'm done with the prepared part, the last time we had a debate, I was saying I promised to talk a lot slower. Now that I don't have something to get through, but I couldn't fulfill that promise last time, so I'm not going to promise it today. So, okay, when we looked at the topic, when we initially conceptualized how to debate this topic, I was worried that it's going to turn into a definitional or an argument about the definitions or what we actually want to look at. And I think, but I don't think it was, I thought it was inevitable. I don't think it was something that we could avoid, right? So yeah, it's true. On our side, we are much more interested to talk about what are the kind of indications that shows that a human being is good, and by all means, it seems to me that the best way to do that is to check out their works. You know, what exactly does a person do? So the distinction between being good and doing good doesn't really make sense to us, right? Because to us, maybe at the, you know, if you've watched Saving Private Ryan, you know, at the very last moment when he came to his grave, because a bunch of soldiers died. If you don't know the story, a bunch of soldiers went into a war zone to save him, and a bunch of people sacrificed themselves because somebody in authority wanted to bring him out of the war zone just because too many of his brothers have died. And so he lived his whole life with the conscience that he chose to be a soldier, but at the end of the day, he ended up costing so many lives just to have himself rescued. And he asked his wife at the tombstone of those soldiers who saved him, was I a good man? And the only way at the end of the day whether you can judge a person's goodness is by what they have actually done in their lives. And of course, there are a lot of arguments about it. Some people think that what is inside a person's mind counts as well, but we don't know what is in each other's mind. So at the end of the day, to us, being good is essentially doing good. But despite that, I can recognize the fact that the argument that you're trying to make is one about whether morality is objective or subjective. But I feel that you need to first point out why is that important. Objective morality is like one of the major arguments which we often hear when it comes to debates about whether humanity can be good without God. But why is it that the morality needs to be objective? It is just a term, right? If we all agree on a set of moral standards and a set of laws which is good and it works for all of us, why does it matter where the source of that morality comes from? So that is a fundamental question which I think, or maybe we can ask that question during cross-examination as well later. So now going into the actual points, the fact that morality can only be achieved with a purpose, and that purpose can only come from God. Now, I actually agree with the first part of that the purpose, the whole purpose thing is actually important, right? You do need to decide what you actually want to accomplish before you decide how successful you are at accomplishing it. Some people put it in other terms, you know, don't always judge success in terms of what everybody tells you success is, but judge it in terms of what you feel you're setting out to accomplish. It makes a lot of sense. That is the whole purpose thing. But to us, our purpose basically comes from ourselves. We are gods, if you like, as blasphemous as it is to say here. No lightning strikes, hopefully. But but I mean, we don't see ourselves in a high regard or whatever, but in a sense of agency, you know, the ability to decide, that is true. We do see ourselves as deciders, arbiters of our own purposes. And how do we decide evolves through time, just like morality, just like everything else. We have conversations, we understand each other a little bit better. But a bigger point is that when it comes to practical purpose, at the end of the day, everybody have different purposes. Somebody who's religious may wish to spend their time on earth worshipping. Somebody else may want to save everybody on earth. They may want to eliminate cancer. They may want to cure diseases. They might want to create the greatest YouTube video with the most hits ever, right? And if that purpose does not affect you, it does not ruin your life, and you know, it generally adds to humanity, what is wrong with that purpose? And why would that be something which you wouldn't applaud, right? And the only way to figure out how we can all accomplish our purposes is to figure out what we can agree to here and now, so that each of us get the opportunity to chase those goals and purposes, right? Whereas in many situations when we take arguments from authority on what our purpose should be, those well, we end up excluding other people's opportunities to chase those purposes, right? So I'm sure you can think of many examples of that. And with the analogy of a knife, true, the maker of the knife decides to make the knife for cutting purposes, but MacGyver comes along, you see, and he decides that it makes a pretty good screwdriver as well. Going back to what I said earlier about the purpose, right? If somebody comes up to me and you're 20 years old and you're full of energy and whatnot, and say, I know exactly what I want to do with my life, you're going to go like, rubbish lah. Right? You know that throughout your life, you're going to have many epiphanies, you're going to have many experiences, and that's going to adjust what exactly you feel you're going to do with the rest of it. And even when you're older, you may revise it further. And I feel that there is nothing wrong with that, as long as you're constantly having a good conversation with everybody else. Now, the second point we heard from Samuel is the argument from authority. So the argument on authority basically says that something, again, it goes back to the whole objective morality question. Something is truly objective only if it comes from a certain authority. But commands does not provide a foundation for morality. Navin, go and murder a couple of people. I mean, that command does not inherently mean that that command is good or bad. Right? If I were to create a robot who doesn't question its commands, and the robot's main purpose is to go around murdering as many people as possible, that does not make a robot who follows my commands good, and it doesn't make a robot who doesn't follow my command bad. Maybe if the robot is the only sentient creature in the world, yeah, then you know, we might be talking about something totally different. But the ability to follow authority does not inherently give you good or bad, give you a moral compass or whatever it is. Today, when we talk about AI research and whatnot, we are actually struggling with the question of how to make robots more moral. And the way we answer that question is by looking at the needs of people like us. Some of you may have heard of the filter bubble. When you go online and you go on Facebook, when you open it, every single time the things that pop up are the things that you click the most often. And you may be a liberal person or you may be a progressive person, and you want to see all different points of view. You would like to know, you know, maybe you quarreled with, or maybe your girlfriend dumped you 20 years ago, and you know, you've never clicked on anything of hers ever since. But when she gets married, and you know, you think that maybe it should just pop up so that you can like it lah, right? But whatever it is, what you show is actually already curated for you, and that curation is based on your own point of view, the echo chamber, which our MC talked about a little bit earlier. And that is an example of an AI which follows the authority, you, right? Your Facebook, you are, again, blasphemous, God. And based on the patterns of your behavior, the AI at Facebook decides, and even Google and everything, decides what exactly it is that you get to see. How is that a conception of good? And this is opposed against journalism, for example, where we are dealing with human beings who try to figure out what it is that human beings need to hear to be able to function in an informed democracy. So these days when we're doing machine learning, AI, and all this kind of creation, we are always struggling with the concept of good. Many of you may have heard the the Microsoft experiment where they put a bot online to read all kinds of Twitter posts. No techies here? Basically, the Twitter bot, the AI robot, is successful in reproducing tweets like human beings, but it ended up turning into a really, really evil robot full of obscenities and whatnot once people on the internet started cursing at it. Right? Same thing goes for another AI research which got depressed when it saw too many things and it started interpreting everything it sees in a very depressing way. And these are basically robots which basically followed the authority and based on the information that's given to it.
Yeah,
so,
1 minute.
So we think that it's a great thing if you are actually able to transcend authority and try to figure out things for yourself. For the last one, I'm not exactly sure how to respond to that about the argument from human depravity. Again, this is a little bit like an authority. The Bible tells you that you have original sin and therefore you are damaged in some way. I don't think I'm very depraved. I acknowledge that I am to some extent. Everybody has their quirks. I like to say that everybody is insane in their own little way. But I would like to believe that I have some level of control over my depravity. And I think there is something which is possible to do through reasoning. And I don't think that telling a lie is entirely a bad thing. You know, when the Germans were murdering Jews during the Holocaust, there are a bunch of Germans who didn't agree with the Nazi principle and they hit Jews. And if lying was bad, then protecting all those people would have been evil as well. So, you know, a lot of things give you their value of good or bad based on consideration on a lot of different factors. So I think that is important to consider as well. Thank you.
Are you going to take 10 minutes?
I'll take 7, you take 3.
Okay, so he will take 7, Sam will take 3 minutes.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being so patient. I hope you've all been very much encouraged from both sides of the argument, but now my objective for my 7 minutes is to just give a critique on what was mentioned by the honorable learned opponents. Okay, don't mind me if I use some formal language. I've been taught parliamentary debate; it automatically comes up. So just please entertain me with that sort of thing. Okay, for the 3 points that my learned colleague had mentioned earlier, from the argument from purpose, an argument from authority, and an argument from human depravity, I'm going to give my friend 3 minutes to be able to just catch up as to what was mentioned earlier. However, I would like to mention a couple of points and anecdotes in reflection of what was said by my learned opponents. Now, for Navin, he mentioned about the Oxford definition about morally right and good being morally right or beneficial to someone or something. And he says that as an atheist and agnostic, he puts them both together in a sense that beneficial to someone or something is in itself morally right. Well, okay, that is an argument of semantics. I don't think we want to waste too much time about that. But we do understand that this concept of goodness, which we are trying to thrive, and I will actually argue that something even is beyond ourselves. There are some things that may be beneficially good to someone or something at the cost of your own expense or cost of your own good. How is that beneficial? It only stands in itself to be morally right. And then also my learned friend talked about two or more, that morality only comes out when 2 or more people are involved. And he gives an illustration of hermit on his own. If a hermit is on his own, then he will not have any of these sort of morality arguments to talk about, you know, who not to kill and so on and so forth. Actually, that's not true. He does have a very big question about murder. Should he kill himself or not? So, because he himself has something to answer for in his own life, the question therefore is, where does he get this moral objectivity and the value of his own life? This is where I would propose a moral lawgiver, a creator, a person that adds value, a person that actually brings up the idea that we do hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, even when a majority of people thought a minority of people is not worth listening to or not worth their own life. Why? Because there's something that's even above the majority. And this is why I will appeal to you to be God. From there, he then talks about a social construct in terms of family and love. Does it just happen? Or he takes a view, or he takes a look at the animals, and say that that is proof that starts with basic biology. I don't know my learned friend have owned hamsters before. Have you owned hamsters before? Okay. All right. If you have owned hamsters before, they do this very interesting phenomenon where after giving birth to some of the hamsters, he actually eats some of them. That's why I believe Frederick Copleston should have asked this question in terms of morality and objectivity and feeling. He actually goes from the idea of culture and from the idea of human biology, or what we call the Darwinian ethics. We then ask this question, my dear friend, in some cultures, men are taught to love their neighbors, others are taught to eat them, both on the basis of feeling. Do you have any personal preference? Obviously, one of them is wrong. As much as a culture itself will say that it could be right. But there is a wrong. And we will give that authority of defining what is right or wrong to a moral lawgiver who we call God. Reciprocal, he talks about altruistic thought, reciprocal altruism. I don't think I want to spend some time. I want to spend some time in that. I actually appreciate what my learned opponent Willie had mentioned. Now, I would like to mention that Willie has actually taken the time to only give an epistemology as to how morality could possibly come out. I don't think that is what the question is proposing for an argument. We are actually talking about the ontology. Where does this concept come from in the first place? Now, if he goes on with this idea that bands that works together, helps one another, then they define who is an ally, who is an enemy, and then from there they kill the enemies, and then they grow bigger to make a tribe, and then for tribe they'll use what we will call, or what they might call a lie in terms of religion, and then you'll give power to the chieftains, and from there we make states. This is what we call, this is actually a very nicely put dialogue about Darwinian ethics. Now, this kind of Darwinian ethics, I must say, it comes from justification only from within itself. And this is a little bit scary, because why? In that same argument, we can actually logically agree that Thanos' purpose, Thanos' power, Thanos' goal in life to kill half of the galaxy's population is actually logically possibly good. Oh dear. I thank God he's not God. Now, he brought up two very interesting topics and what will actually might peeve possibly the Christian population, because it's a very sensitive topic about homosexuality and veganism, which I will be with him in the sense that I will not give up my meat.
You got 1 more minute.
But the actual argument but the actual condition of when we want to talk about homosexuality and vegetarianism is not the question of whether it is right or wrong to be homosexual in the first place, but whether it is right or wrong to actually do homosexuality in the first place, which we will need to talk about it another time. However, I would say the objective moral obligation that we have is that whether a homosexual or a vegan were to walk into a church hall or in a location or in city hall or in any court of law, we have this truth that is self-evident to say that their lives, their vegan, their homosexual lives are equal in value, equal in opportunity, and equal to have a hearing. This is something that transcends even the moral framework. Now, given I don't have enough time, I actually have a few little anecdotes about what Willie had said, but I should take it? Okay, mashallah, I shall take it. Now, my learned opponent talks about actually one of my favorite movies, Saving Private Ryan, and he focuses on only the ending of the movie. Am I a good man? And then, of course, the wife will point to his children and grandchildren. Then we see that maybe good is something that is extrinsic as to what you do. But he forgot to mention the beginning of the movie, where the marshal of the army actually looked at the case study and say that, okay, by my authority and for the purpose of bringing hope into this country, I will ask a squadron to go in and save this Private Ryan. It is by that purpose and by that authority that that team actually was willing to give their own lives to save Private Ryan. That's why there is a link from purpose to authority. Why is my learned friend asked the question, why is objective morality important? And then he gives a proposal or a reflection on what we actually call to be Epicurean thought. Epicurean thought is that the purpose of life is whatever that just makes me happy. I would just like to reflect on two people. One was Anthony Bourdain. Anthony Bourdain, according to a friend of mine, he himself reflected on this, and I agree with him. Anthony Bourdain, to a millennial, is the definition of human success. He can travel, he is online, he's on video, he puts YouTube videos out, he is a popular public figure. If he is that successful and that makes him happy and that's his purpose in life, why did he take his own life?
You got 1 more minute.
And then again, I hope that's not what God said Anthony Bourdain. And another reflection, I will say this. Woody Allen, in reflection of life and purpose and meaning, in light of morality, he says this very, very poignantly, which I think Anthony Bourdain should have taken some time to think about. He says, I don't want to live in my work where I think my work will give me purpose and morality and future in life. I want to live in my apartment. I want to be alive. And life itself, therefore, beckons the idea of morality. And therefore, morality comes from the one who gives that life in the first place. My learned friend Willie acknowledges that he is depraved, although he has control. I agree. But I want to ask about his depravity. Not in detail, but just one question. Says who? And thus the need for transcendent morality. Thank you very much.
Okay, now we go to the first cross-examination where each side is given 6 minutes. Questions only. They are only allowed to question each other through this cross-examination. No new arguments, but just to ask the other side questions. So I now open it to the other side to ask questions to this side.
Testing, okay. So first question, does God command a particular action because it is morally right, or is it morally right because God commands it?
All right, the question you're asking is called the Euthyphro dilemma. Basically, is an action good because God commands it, or does God know that it is good? I'll tell you the problem with both of this. If an action is good because God commands it, it makes morality arbitrary or random. Mm-hmm. But if an action is good because God knows it is good, then of course it makes God himself subject to morality. And you're right in assuming that both positions are problematic. My solution to this is to simply say morality is neither good because God commands it, nor is it good because God knows that it is good. It is good because that is the way God is. God's nature, therefore, is the very benchmark of morality. And that was precisely my point earlier. So love is good because, not because God says it, or because God knows it, but love is good because God is love. And likewise, vice versa with truth and the rest of it.
So if God's nature is good, that would mean that God would be unable to commit acts of evil, right?
No, you see, the problem is a definitional issue, Willie, because when you say God would be able to commit actions of evil, you're bypassing the definition I put forward, which is that God's very nature is the benchmark of good. So God is not loving because he chooses to, because that is what he is. So I think the question is a bit of a misunderstanding.
Yeah, but it's an important question, right? Because like, how would you be able to forgive someone if you are unable to have the perception of how that person is? And if you are unable to have a perception of someone who is evil, then how would you You get what I mean?
I don't.
How would you be able to perceive, like if you're unable to lie, how would you then be able to fairly deal with somebody who is capable of lying, or somebody who has lied?
Yeah, so basically what I would say is basically God by nature is truth, and that's what makes truth true. But for me, sin, and basically that's your question essentially, right? Sin is basically an attack on God's nature. So it's important actually to realize that the Bible actually says about Jesus who became man, that God made him who knew no sin to become sin, in the sense that he carried our sinfulness. So the point I'm trying to get across is that there is no relational knowledge on the part of God. And you heard me right. I don't believe when we say that God is omniscient, he knows all things. That is not the definition of omniscience. Omniscience simply means that God knows all propositional statements. But when you talk about relational knowledge, God doesn't relationally know what sin is. You're right.
Okay, so then to change it to something more relevant to us, on earth, would you rather have a judge who is incapable of perceiving depravity, or would you rather have one which is equal to you, who is actually capable of perceiving depravity or performing it, for that matter?
You're asking me if it's a preference.
Yeah, your preference on earth.
If it's on earth, could you repeat the question again, please?
On earth,
Yeah.
if you had committed a crime, or maybe you were accused of a crime which you didn't commit, would you rather have a judge who is capable and capable of performing or understanding depravity, or a judge who is completely incapable of perceiving or understanding it?
Again, you're presuming, I guess, from your question, you're asking me a question about my preference. Let me put that aside and basically just say that, when you presume that, well, because I think essentially the Christian doctrine is that God understood that when he became fully man. So, in a sense, I think Christ is able to empathize, and I think that's what the book of Hebrews is trying to say, that he fully is able to sympathize with man. So we do have a judge who is able to sympathize, who has been, according to the book of Hebrews, tempted in all aspects, yet without sin. Who is in his human nature. My point is, he was able to do those things, tempted in those very things as we are. So he is really the judge. So my point is, based on the human nature of Christ, he kind of is able to distinguish that. So I think the question is, I don't see how the relevance of that question is.
Yeah, but you didn't answer my
No, I told you I wasn't going to answer it because I had no preference on the matter.
Okay, let's move on to the objective morality thing about authority. So are you saying that if God does not exist, you'd run around murdering and stealing things?
In fact, it's not me that's saying this, but actually Richard Dawkins, the champions of atheism, who says this. He says, the universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. So really, I'm with Richard Dawkins on this one, although he's not my fan, as you'll rightly assume. But I'm saying that this is what atheism is. When you stare at the face of atheism, when there's no God, basically every man lives for himself. What is preventing me from killing someone else if it would advance my own family, for that matter?
One more minute.
Right, so you didn't answer my question again. Okay, so do you then, so I'm going to assume that you're not going to run around murdering and stealing things if you don't hear a commandment from a higher authority. Then in that case, is objective morality just something which is beautiful, like it's better to have, or is it something which is completely necessary for a human being to be good?
I don't understand the question. You want to tackle that?
Or why is objective morality better than subjective morality, if you like?
I would say that we actually don't have a choice. It's not the question of whether better or worse, but the question of is. The reality is that we do have this such a thing called objective morality. We do have such a thing as a moral concept, which all of us will agree that to be wrong, agree to be wrong, whether we like to or not. And even your idea of a judge just now, both are flawed. I do not, and that's why I'm with him. I do not prefer either one of them, simply because I know both of that is flawed. By the very essence that both of them are human, and then both of them are human, and then both of them does not work. On the atheist point of view, or a free point of view, is that I would rather choose someone that would get me out of jail. That's my choice. But justice and goodness is not my choice. And for true justice and for goodness for it to prevail, I will have to submit to your authority and wish for someone who will tell me this is wrong, however I can help.
Okay. Now the other side can do the cross-examination, the other side, for 6 minutes.
All right, Willie, both Willie and Navin, basically, I'm addressing to any one of you. You believe it's morality is circled around, say, the flourishing of humanity. Would that be an accurate statement?
Yes.
Yeah. Why is that good in your opinion?
We are the only sentient beings that we are aware of at our level of thinking and consciousness. So the only way to understand how the universe functions, what we should do if there's a higher purpose or whatever it is to continue having this. And therefore, any goal which advances the ability for more humans to be able to participate is a good thing.
Yeah, you're saying, if I understand you correctly, you're saying basically the flourishing of life is a good thing because that is our purpose. My question is, who gave that purpose? Why is it good?
Nobody gave us that purpose.
So fair to say that the flourishing of tigers is just equally as important as the flourishing of human beings, given that they are both sentient lives?
I wouldn't agree because we are able to demonstrate the fact that we are more conscious and we are more intelligent, if you like, than tigers. Tigers is not aware of the fact that there's an Andromeda galaxy which is hurtling towards us and is going to hit us in a couple of million years. We are capable of perceiving it. If aliens arrive on Earth, we are capable of interacting with them. So, yeah.
So on the basis of us basically having a higher sentient value, as you put it, that simply gives us more of a right and value of being here than, say, other sentient creatures?
Not really.
Okay, I misunderstood you then.
I mean, like you were talking about the comparison between consciousness, right? So that's my answer. But in that, the environment on the Earth is really, really important for our survival. As in, even if you care only about humanity, you still need to preserve Earth as it is. I would put that equally. I put other things equally as important, like making ourselves a multi-planetary civilization, for example, right? But the fact that we have to maintain a functioning ecosystem of Earth is very important as well.
You say we need to preserve Earth. Where does that obligation? I hope you understand where I'm coming from here. Where does the command come from? Where does the trust of it come from? You are basically, if I'm right, help me get this if I'm wrong. Is it fair to say that your position is basically arbitrary just because we are here? That's why it has to be that way.
No, it is not arbitrary. I mean, it doesn't come from anybody, but it doesn't make it arbitrary. If tomorrow is Father's Day and I decide to celebrate Father's Day and I decide to spend time with him, today. It doesn't make my decision arbitrary, right? It is a thinking decision. So my purpose doesn't come from any particular source, right? It's not commanded to me by anything, but it is something which I've sat down, considered, thought my whole life about, right? So that I don't think is arbitrary. I don't think is a fair word to use for that.
All right. Presume a world in which, for example, if for the flourishing of humanity, you're familiar with eugenics, right? Right. Imagine a world where, for the flourishing of humanity, if, let's say, the sciences were to prove, for example, that it would be good to terminate the lives of people who are terminally ill, terminate the lives of people who are physically disabled, just basically to promote flourishing. Why, on your worldview, would that be wrong? Because at the end of the day, the sciences prove that it flourishes humanity.
Right. To have a consistent worldview, yes, if science proves it, sure. But science will never prove that, right? Like science, there's a lot of hypothetical situations. There's this cannibals on a boat thing. I'm sure you've read of that before. Science does not try to measure the value of human life. I mean, the best we can do is like one life versus another, but there are positive effects of having people around. Stephen Hawking is the best example of that. Somebody who supposedly is unable to interact by every measure or has a reduced capacity to interact still managed to write awesome things and make awesome observations about the universe. So you cannot predict which human is capable of what. The fact that our consciousness, we are unable to compare our consciousnesses or measure them against each other tells us that we should be respectful and open to everybody's opportunity towards that. That's back to the rebuttal I said earlier about, different purposes and making sure everybody has the opportunity to advance theirs.
And you're also ignoring, taking into account human empathy and all these things, which we've also seen exhibited in animals like higher apes, bonobos and everything. They take care of their old as well. It's not just a simple thing. Humans are complex beings. We take into account emotions and rational decisions. So it's not just simply because it's rational. And there have been rational situations where humans have chosen the more difficult choice, the harder path, because they feel it is more comprehensive. And just because a way is easy does not mean it's the best way.
One more minute.
Well, maybe in my final minute, let me deal with the issue of depravity then. You did admit that you were depraved, and I'd just like to press home on, not that, I'm equally as depraved as you are, just so that, if it makes you feel better. Based on whose standard were you judging yourself just now?
The fact that I'm not in jail and that only a reasonable number of people hate me, how else does anybody else judge, your own standing in social life, Yeah. I'd like to add that many of us judge ourselves by the way we think. Like, I'm going to save the world tomorrow, therefore I'm an awesome person. But society judges us by what we do, right? So a lot of the times we think ourselves awesome, and we definitely should consider how other people perceive us in terms of what good we have actually achieved. Yeah.
Thank you. Now we come to the second rebuttal, where 6 minutes are given to each side. This is to respond to the previous rebuttal or cross-examination.
Hi, back again. So just now we spent quite a bit of time talking over each other a bit because of theology and differences of opinions. Now, I just want to go back and slightly defend the points I made earlier. And Mark brought up that, hamsters eat their young, which was the only thing I felt that attacked my point. But you see, hamsters only eat their young because you put them in cages and they feel that they don't have enough space for their kids to grow. And, all these kind of reasons. In the wild, hamsters don't really eat their young. But, that belies a different point, that when we look at animals, that there are different levels of animals. All of them don't behave the same. Praying mantises kill their mates while they have sex. But, we don't use that as a moral standard. My example was to purely show that the basis of our empathy, of how we relate to each other, our family, our loved ones, and in fact, even some beyond that, our in-groups, the tribes that we form, are based in our biology, that we have these natural inclinations to do these kind of things. So, and I don't think that was actually refuted. Now, secondly, they brought up the purpose, defending my points back. We brought up that we form communities. And that shows the purpose of morality. Now, morality exists because we have to live together as a society. That is purely simply why morality needs to exist, so that we can cooperate as a society and work together and build great things, as Willie mentioned. So, as far as I am concerned, that is the purpose of morality. There is no need for a higher authority. It's just so that we can live and work together. Now, Samuel brought up several things. Now, he mentioned that the argument from purpose. And we think that, just because you say that something needs a purpose does not mean that purpose cannot be defined by ourselves, that it has to come from someone higher. We think that this is a mischaracterization. We can find purpose in a lot of different things. We don't need it to come from a higher power. And we believe that I'm stumbling here. Should have organized my thoughts a bit better. We don't need a higher purpose to tell us what to do. We are able to figure that out all for ourselves. And we have also come across this self-sacrificing altruism. Now, sometimes we do things that hurt us, that benefits others. Now, why do we do that? Now, this is an answer to the point that just because that we don't just maximize the good in the world, we that means sacrificing. Sorry. I'm going to yield my remaining time. Willie, do you want to take this?
All right, the point of the self-sacrificing altruism, right? So the question which we were dealing with was, why would a human being decide to do something which actually harms themselves? So then how do you measure the benefits of doing something which benefits others if it also actually costs you something? So I would say that anything that you actually do is a form of self-sacrificing altruism. If you choose to spend time like helping the community, it is time that you could spend something else. That is a certain level of sacrifice on your part already. That's the whole definition of altruism, right? But that's the whole debate that we're having here today. Do you need somebody to tell you that something is good before you go ahead and do it? Or are you able to figure it out yourself? Now, on their side, they very strongly believe that life is meaningless and things cannot be made sense of unless somebody has given you an objective morality. Somebody who has an authority has actually come down and told you what exactly it is that you need to do. But on our side, if you agree that the state of humankind, the state of human beings in the world is something which you are able to adjudicate, and you're able to adjudicate whether an action actually advances that condition, that human condition, then you should be able to tell whether it is something which is good or not. And from there, you get to decide, right? At the end of the day, if nobody is telling you to do something because, and telling you whether the action is good or not, you decide whether it is something which is good or not, and you decide whether it is something which you want to spend your time on. And at the end of the day, if you are unable to weigh the differences between these kinds of things,
Yeah, one more minute.
Then you spend more time, right? You talk to more people, you expand your perspective, you learn more about your fellow human beings, and you decide for yourself what exactly it is that you find important. And I guess the crux of the debate today is whether we agree that humanity is capable of doing something like that, right? At the end of the day, the decisions of one person may differ from your own. You may consider them depraved. In absence, or if you do not apply your objective moral standard, wherever it may come from, personally, you may agree or disagree with the person. But we're not talking about one or two people. We're talking about millions, billions of people around the world. And at the end of the day, what is it that we should spend our time on as humanity, as individuals, as part of a community, that we should do in order to make sure that we all have opportunities to pursue whatever it is that we decide? And at the end of the day, if you don't fit and you decide to do terrible things like murder and whatnot, society will remove you. And that is what morality essentially is. Thanks.
I'll do this 3 minutes. All right. I might finish sooner. Well, I hope you've been enjoying this so far. I hope you paid careful attention to everything that we said during the cross-examination, because one of the things I hope you realize is that the thrust of the argument seems to have gone from there is basically a purpose, or there is objective morality, to we can develop objective morality. And I hope you see that difference. If I came here today and you asked me if there was electricity here and I said, well, we can make electricity, what does that tell you about the state of electricity in this building? That there is none. And that was precisely my point in the opening debate, that if God doesn't exist, basically all that we have, and don't take my word for it, this is Richard Dawkins speaking, call it argument from authority if you want, but this is not my authority. He says, if God doesn't exist, then there is no good, there is no evil. What we have left is pitiless indifference. Now, the thrust of their argument has really been on this point called reciprocal altruism, which for those of you who don't know what that means, it simply means I scratch your back, you scratch mine. That's essentially what it means. Of course, oversimplifying it just for the sake of clarity. But I want to say this, that all it does, notice when I said in my opening section that we are going to be talking about what is versus what ought. Even if it is good that we do this, notice what good is. We are conflating between prudential values and ethical values. What's the difference? Prudential values is what is the smart thing to do, what helps us survive, what keeps the species going. That's the smart thing. We are discussing prudential values. But notice the topic of tonight's debate is not what is the smart thing to do for humanity moving forward. It is, can we be good without God? And I submit to you that that is an ethical question, not a prudential one. So on this argument of prudential, I would say that they are right. I mean, doing this will help. And that is the whole point of reciprocal altruism. Now, it's definitely a prudent move, but it's not a moral one, as I said, because it is ultimately rooted in what even Richard Dawkins calls selfishness. Listen to a quote by Richard Dawkins. Listen to a quote by Richard Dawkins for reciprocal altruism. This is what Dawkins says. He says, we do this for acquiring a reputation of generosity and kindness. We do this for acquiring a reputation of generosity or kindness, or, this is Dawkins speaking, a way of buying unfakeably authentic advertising. This is what Dawkins is saying. And basically, it is not doing good, but basically appearing good. If the debate tonight has been on what helps us appear good so that we all appear good to one another, friends, they have won it. But that is not the debate tonight. The question is whether we are inherently good or not. And my fear is that on the basis of this, what we have is a group of people pretending to be good with one another, but due to the state of human depravity, unable to living up. I'm still going to maintain my point. Only Christ, with his self-sacrificial love on the cross, it is not a demonstration or an advertising of good, but one that is inherently formed in his sacrifice. So I hope that you consider that. Mark?
My learned opponent, Willie, mentioned about how societies will naturally find a murderer, those who will mass murder a whole bunch of people, and then take them and then slowly put them in prison, either call him to be psychologically mad, or maybe he's deserved of it. And if he did it in the great state of Texas, he'll be given the death penalty. Okay, but here's the thing: we would like the things, and that's a very idealistic framework to say the least. Whereas in the reality, if we allow a godless, meaning something that is without authority, that's above us, then nothing is enforced. In fact, if I may, just for a moment. Yes. As Rice Brooks had mentioned, and when we leave that alone to be, what do we end up seeing, especially in the last century? Pol Pot, Mao Zedong, I get very angry here. I get very hearing it because it's also a little personal. Okay, but think about this way. In the past, in the 20th century, it has become especially regarded as one of the bloodiest centuries ever to exist compared to all the other centuries combined. Why? So much death. And where did all this death come from? In areas that recommends to be not just secular, but godless states. We look at USSR, we look at the Cultural Revolution, we look at the Red Guard Revolution. 60 million people died per country in that place. Why did not anybody take them, put them in jail, regard them either as psychiatry mad, or maybe put them in the great state of Texas so they may deserve death? Without them, as Rice Brooks would put it, the godless regimes of Stalin, Mao Zedong, and Pol Pot eclipsed the horrors of previous centuries primarily because of the moral restraint was removed when it was eliminated from their thinking. Without God, moral commands are met by schoolyard cries like mine of Sesu.
One more minute.
In the last minute, I would like to bring up the MacGyver screwdriver that he mentioned earlier. Well, what he's doing is that he's repurposing the knife to be a screwdriver. But if a knife is repurposed to be a screwdriver, does it actually fulfill its full potential or purpose? It does not. It was actually given innately to first to be a good knife. Now, here's where the gospel can come in parallel. I would love to buy that blunt knife. I'll be willing to pay more than 2 ringgit for that blunt knife. Only because I know the ability to put a whetstone on it, sharpen it, and give it its true purpose. The gospel is the idea that Jesus comes in, sees the bluntness in our lives, the depravity in our lives, and is willing to pay for his own life so that we can be resharpened again. I leave that to the floor.
Now we move to the second cross-examination. Again, the other side can ask questions relevant to the second rebuttal. So can I invite the other side to begin first? You're given 6 minutes.
Your choice, your call.
Do it now.
All right. More than happy to. You want to start, Mark? All right, okay. Well, we realize the thrust of the argument, as I mentioned earlier, is on reciprocal altruism. Would you agree with Dawkins when he says that ultimately what we're doing is just acquiring a reputation for being good? Would you agree with him on that, or would you disagree with Dawkins?
No, I disagree with Dawkins. I don't think that we just do it because to gain an appearance. Maybe Dawkins is a bit more nihilistic in his point of view, but regardless of whether or not I think I disagree with Dawkins on the intentions, we both agree on what it causes, which is that people behave good to one another in society.
Right. Now, I remember asking the difference between prudential values and also ethical values. I wonder what your response will be to that, bearing in mind that all that you've been saying on reciprocal altruism is essentially the prudent move, not necessarily the ethical one. Your response?
My response is it's both. It is prudent and ethical. There's no reason why it shouldn't be both. I don't think you showed why one cannot be the other at the same time.
I believe I did, but you can ask me on that in the time when you cross-examine me. But back to my opening argument, I argued from the argument of purpose. You agreed, and can I say that you have agreed on premise one, that nothing can be objectively good without an objective purpose? You kind of conceded to that, Willie? Or did I hear you wrong?
There was a point in your rebuttal where you said that the debate has become about where we get objective morality from. I still don't think that morality, at least the one that applies to us, is objective in any way. I completely acknowledge this is subjective. It's like I said in my speech, right? It's subjective and it changes with time depending on the needs of the people that define those ethical values.
So basically, if I understand you correctly, the morality of people, say, 2,000 years ago, would be determined by their own time and their own culture, and basically we would have no say on it.
It was determined by their own time. Whether we should judge what they decided back then, I mean, whether we should or should not is one thing. We definitely do it all the time. I mean, I personally think that the way people treated homosexuals is barbaric. But what is the purpose of making such a judgment call? You know, it's like looking at an ant and going like, you're an idiot. So you may feel very self-satisfied about that, but considering the lack of information and the lack of mental faculties or whatever it is, not mental faculties, the lack of knowledge or whatever it is, you cannot take them to account. But what you should do is then to use that to build upon the future morality and discourse about ethics that you have.
Okay, let me narrow the question down. Say the Holocaust, was that evil in your opinion?
Yes.
If the majority of the people living at that time would have said it's good, would you agree with them that at that time it was good, but now it should be condemned?
If I am a person living at that time, I may have a different...
No, I'm asking now.
Now I don't agree with them.
But on your worldview, how would you condemn them? Because they were basically acting to the moral standards of their time.
Because today you have data and statistics that tells you what exactly happened during that time, right? We're applying this to now. So we always build our ethics and morals based on what we know now.
Right.
Right? And that ethics and morals, like I said, build upon what we should do as a society now. Right? And when we look back, of course, it's not true that most people at that time thought that what the Nazis were doing was correct. But even whatever, actually that makes a very good point. You know, like the whole question, most people back then thought that many things, homosexuality was a perversion, for example, right? And you may point to them and say, hey, these people knew no better, right? But today we know better, and therefore we should have a better understanding and a better treatment of homosexuals.
All right, let me push to the next point, the argument from authority. I said in my opening speech that the moral obligations and duties require an authoritative lawgiver. Now my question is, if there is no authority behind it, what makes it binding for all men? Bearing in mind, you just said that it is subjective. So what if the majority disagrees with you?
It doesn't need to be binding on all men.
It doesn't need to be.
It doesn't need to be, because if you murder somebody in this hall right now, 5 other people will tie you down, right? Like I said, this is the purpose of my question last time. Are you saying that if nobody tells you that you shouldn't run around murdering people, you will immediately go around doing it? Which I felt that you did not sufficiently answer that question. The fact of the matter is you won't. There are certain standards which we live by today. So the fact of the matter, the fact of the matter is that people have developed, you know, a sense of this kind of ethics and whatnot.
Yeah, but basically, just to press in a little bit, what is the authority that makes it binding? Bearing in mind that basically it's just, at the end of the day, your subjective opinion in your own words.
It's not my subjective opinion, because if it's just mine, nobody would take it seriously. Right? It's what we have in terms of ethics today is something which has gone through discussion. Declaration of Human Rights was not made by 1 or 2 people. It wasn't even made by the how many 100 people who sat down for the discussion. It's informed by a whole bunch of laws and rules of ethics which have gone through tons of discussion. I'm sure in your research for today's debate, you have read so much philosophical discussion about what forms ethics, how it comes about, Kantian ethics, categorism, you know, consequentialism. People have talked about it for years and years, and that is the basis. That is how we come to arrive at a moral compass or a moral framework. And it doesn't have to come from a higher authority. Even if it doesn't come from a higher authority, we can achieve that through discussion, through understanding what each other's perspective is. It's not something that I say. It's something which as many of us say as possible, because it's important to all of us.
Thank you.
Now is the other side to do the second cross-examination.
Do you have statistics to back up your point about the increase in death in the world?
Right now, no, but I think it's. But I do believe it is a regular. It is a regular exertion based on knowledge of someone else that has. If you like, I will do some research and get on it.
Right, but do you know for sure that the statistics show that more people are dying today than in the past? Remember, you can't lie.
I can't, but simply because, but just reflecting on the simple idea, we have tombs of unknown soldiers, so they are nameless, countless nameless people that have still died during the past century. So I do not know, but I do know it's just rising and rising and rising.
Okay, going back to the original objective morality thing, why exactly do you, okay, let's clarify first. Do you feel that humans are unable to behave in a good way if they don't have an authority telling them to do so?
Go first.
All right. I mean, yeah, it's because basically we both touched on it. You know, if you heard my opening argument, I clearly said in my disclaimer that it's not about whether you can do good, and of course you said doing good and being good is irrelevant. I disagree. But you basically, sorry, lost my train of thought. Can you just sorry? What's the question again? Sorry.
Why do you prefer objective morality so much? Are you saying that it is impossible for humans to
behave
in a good way?
So basically what I'm saying, it's not whether it is possible or impossible or what enables or what doesn't disables a person to do good. It simply is not good if there is no purpose at the end of the day, and I don't think the question is, are we therefore going to run around chopping each other? That's not the point. The point is, what is actually good is what, in my opening argument, stated, what fulfills my purpose. I think he may want to add to that.
I'm reflecting on the words of atheistic psychologist Steven Pinker, who says it is equally accurate to say that it is wrong to molesting little children as saying 2 + 2 = 5 is also wrong. There are something that I am bogged. It's not that whether I would do something or not, but the fact that there is. Whether I do it or not, there is something something out there that is telling me that, hey, molesting little children is wrong, as same as 2 + 2 = 5, it goes wrong. Where does the value or the logic of all these come to be in such a uniform matter, even though I might have the authority and I might have my own depraved purposes of molesting that little child? That's the conundrum that we are facing, and that's why we answer the question that way: can humanity be good without God?
Right, but assuming that you have your depravity under control, wouldn't then the experience of the child being molested also inform whether you should do it or not? If nobody tells you you shouldn't do it, if no authority tells you you shouldn't do it, wouldn't it be something that you can decide for yourself? And if you are unable to decide for yourself, doesn't that make you evil?
On what basis?
The fact that you would molest a child if an authority does not tell you not to do it.
But then I'll then say, says who?
Okay.
I'll just basically just add to that and basically say that again the problem is that we agree that it is not the prudential thing to do, and I think that's everyone would have here. I hope they notice that is the thrust of tonight's debate, a debate between what is prudential and what is ethical. And I'm saying prudentially, I agree with you that it's not the wisest thing to do. It inflicts pain, but I see no reason on the atheistic worldview, in the absence of God, I mean, that why such a thing would be evil. If anything, it would be out of line, irregular, but not evil, definitely, because that objective morality is not there.
Okay, so what is the basic difference between being good and doing good? Can you...
Yeah, okay, basically doing good is that, okay, very simple illustration. I think Hitler, or take every evil person in the world whom you would, in your standard, your subjective standard, as you said, classify as evil. You would say they were not good, they were evil, but I'm sure that each one of them has done good in their life, in one way or the other. In one way or the other, they have done good. So the distinction between doing good and being good is, one is a state of being in basically a person's life in total. You of course cited Saving Private Ryan at the end of it. Have I been good? But I'm saying that even a person, the worst possible person you can imagine, has done good. I hope, is that clear?
So,
One more minute.
Are you saying that if a person does a whole bunch of good in their life and they do a couple of evil acts, then they cannot be good? That means they're evil, right?
Can you please repeat that question again? Sorry.
Because based on your answer just now, apparently if somebody does any kind of evil, then they are unable to be good.
It depends on who.
That seems to be what Samuel was saying.
Yeah. Okay, basically what I'm saying is that if they've done evil, they would need to basically pay the price for it. I think that the whole gist of the argument on depravity is that not only does, when you put, you see, I think we need to go beyond what just saying that we cannot be good.
Samuel, because in the interest of time, can I just, because the topic says, can humanity be good without God? Are you sort of saying that humanity cannot be good even with God? Because we're all depraved, and I'm sure you're not saying that.
No, I think if you heard my third argument, Willie, you would realize that I said because of God, and namely the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, that is the only hope of humanity of actually being good. And you're right to say that I feel that sin tarnishes our ability to be good. So basically, if you've done wrong, for example, if I've parked my car every single day of the year and just one day parked it wrong, I cannot accuse the law enforcement guy to saying, why didn't you give me a coupon for parking 365 days right, but put a summons the one day I put wrong. I'm still an offender, even if I make one mistake. All right.
Now we come to the closing speech where this side will go first.
All right.
It's given 6 minutes.
All right. Well, I want to just bring, some of you may have watched it. This is not the first time I've debated Willie and both Navin. The first time I debated Willie, and the only last time I've done that was in 2012. And in that debate, I agree I lost to Willie on content, but Willie said that he did admit in his debate that he lost to me on politeness. And I want to say that credit to them, we've all, I think, maintained equal level of politeness. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for maintaining that high standard of decorum. We disagreed with each other from the start on what is objective moral values. They, of course, stated that it doesn't make a difference whether it's objective or not. It is just terminology. I beg to differ. I think the opposite was actually true. You see, if morality is subjective, end of the day, morality is just terminology. It is just what you define good versus what I define good. You can imagine a world where 50% people believe that a particular action X is right, and the other 50% believe that an action X is wrong. Ultimately, only one man would make the difference and say, this is what the majority is. That one guy is the kingmaker. If you follow the recent GE election, you'll be very familiar with what I'm talking about. The kingmaker in that whole thing. So my point here remains that we need to establish the objectivity. It is not to say that a person cannot do good deeds, but rather, why is a deed at all good? Why on the atheistic worldview is good at all? Why is it loving? Why is loving good? Why is speaking the truth good? All our opponents could say today is that it was the prudential thing to do. Of course, they didn't say that. They used reciprocal altruism to say that. But at the end of the day, when I think we pressed during the cross-examination, it became pretty clear that at the end of the day, on surface, all you have is basically a tendency of appearing good for the purpose of advancing humanity. I want to say I agree with them that that is the wise thing to do prudentially, but it still doesn't answer the question of good. Just in the closing moments, I just want to address back my points. Argument one, the argument from purpose. No one can be objectively good without a purpose. We have seen that all we can do is to develop our own purpose, and I've pointed out why that is actually fits the bill, no purpose at all. And I argued that why premise 2, objective purpose, can only be derived from a creator. Yet again, the argument was we have to develop our own. My assurance to them is you don't need to. There is already one. Just buy it. And therefore, let's move into the second argument that I made from authority. We've discussed that over the cross-examination. Moral obligations and duty require an authoritative moral lawgiver. They said we don't need to again because we can decide what is good. In Willie's own words, we are gods. But you see, the problem is that we have far too many gods around, if that was true. And which God should we listen to? Is it God Samuel or God Willie? You decide. The majority can vote again and decide which God is better. But at the end of the day, leads to no objective moral standard. It is arbitrary at best, meaningless at worst. My second argument I would contend hold, but let me just in the closing moments spend time on the third one, the depravity of man. That was the final question that was raised, and I want you to consider this today. When we do something wrong on an earthly court, that one thing wrong will basically make us susceptible for judgment. If God did exist, and basically we were in defiance to it. Willie, of course, was asking, how would we know what is good? I misunderstood his questions in the first cross-examination. My apologies for that. But you see, it's written deep inside our heart. We all know the good that we are supposed to do. The problem is we struggle to actualize it. The Apostle Paul in the Bible says, the good that I know I'm supposed to do, I fail to do, but the bad that I don't want to do, that I end up doing, it tells you humanity has a problem. And what we need at the end of the day is a savior. Humanity can be good. And this is the difference at the end of the day. I can offer a solution to you in the form of Jesus Christ. We have historic evidence for that. And in fact, before Willie proposed this debate topic, I actually proposed to Willie, let's do a debate on the resurrection, the historicity of the resurrection of Christ. I'm willing to debate on that. And Willie said, of course, he had his reasons for declining. But my point is, the resurrection of Jesus Christ gives us reason to believe there is hope for humanity only if we accept Christ, who became fully God, fully man, able to empathize with us in all our weakness. I suggest you look to him if you want to be good. Thank you.
Now, I invite the other side to give their closing speech.
ladies and gentlemen, what we have talked about on the side of the secular humanists is basically our belief that whatever benefits the most people is what is morally right. And on the other hand, what we have heard from the theist side is that the objective morality is absolutely necessary, and to be good, with a focus on the difference between being and doing good, and how this can only come from some kind of authority. Now, if you've been following the debate closely, and as Samuel and I both feared, we did quite a lot of talking past each other this debate. It's something adjudicators really hate in British parliamentary debating, same training, him as well, as it is really annoying for the audience, because you then have to try to keep in your mind two totally different arguments which don't really talk to each other. But I think that in a debate like this, it is something which is quite unavoidable. However, considering both sides of the issue, I feel that the question at the end of the day is that, do you agree that humans are capable of judging what is good for all of us, considering that, and even Christians, even with your objective morality, are we able to decide what is good for all of us to pursue those purposes, those moralities, and are we capable of deciding what we can do for that good? Ladies and gentlemen, I used to tell my friends that there are two types of atheists, the lazy atheists and the conceited atheists. The lazy ones apparently turn to atheism simply because they got lazy to go to church, every Sunday and everything. Maybe they do exist. However, I hope we've shown to you today that there is a conceited brand of atheism, those of us who really have thought it through, maybe a little bit too much. We've gone from questioning the religious dogma people often take as absolute truth to exploring what we should do with the lives that we have, that question of purpose that was brought up today. I personally have this really bad tendency to tell people, and myself, that we're no better than monkeys. My friends have heard this many, many times before, and they're like rolling their eyes right now. Unless we've thought long and hard about the choices that we make in life and how we want to live our lives, how are we better than monkeys? And it's got nothing to do with evolution or any of those sensitive stuff. You could substitute monkey for any kind of life form. It's about the fact that our life routine from birth, learning, mating, raising a family, and death is pretty standard for every creature on earth, regardless of what species you are. Sure, we have formal education. Instead of observing your elders, we get a job instead of climbing a tree to get a banana, but the basic purpose of those activities remain the same. We're here to survive. There is every evidence that we are servants of our genes. The Dawkins quote that Samuel likes so much, but unfortunately misquotes, refers to genes, not people. In the absence of blah, 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 isn't the only thing that remains is meaningless existence. He's referring to genes, right? You are driven by your genes. The life cycle of every living creature on earth is in service to it. It's responsible for icky things like horniness and masturbation. Say it quietly because we're in a church. And more uplifting things like love, maternal, paternal bonds, and our determination to survive. Now, I know it's starting to sound a little depressing. I depress myself sometimes, but we do get to the good part. We know that we are the only species so far that can transcend this. We can figure out better ways to live together. We are capable of dedicating our lives to improving the lives of others, yes, at our own cost. And the best part of it all, is that we can decide to do this. We can decide to do this of our own accord by no greater authority. And we can help to advance humanity by having conversations like this, exactly like this. We try to figure out what works for all of us, or at least as many of us as possible. And we do this as free-thinking persons rather than surrendering to our natural inclinations, the prejudices of our peers, and on our part at least, the questionable commands of an alleged higher power. Now, who do you trust more? Someone who decides not to steal your money because they have reasoned out for themselves that it is the right thing to do, or someone who decides the same because he's afraid he'll be punished for it? Who is truly good in this particular situation? A lot of what is good stems from what ensures that we are able to survive, to continue exploring the important questions in life, in determining what fulfills us, all of us, and refining our purpose as individuals. So until aliens come along, to us, secular humanism seems a pretty awesome worldview to rally around. And if you disagree with humanism, the secular part at least has to apply to all of us to maximize good. In a world where different individuals may not necessarily agree on all things, the common ground should be what directly affects the human condition here and now. My right to swing my fist ends where your nose begins. The freedom to swing your fist is good. Maybe you're practicing some kind of martial arts. The right not to have your nose punched is also good. And there should be a good middle ground between the two. Thank you.